Welcome to another edition of TrilliumTalkTV. Something different, something better. I'm your host, Greg LaRue. Last week my guest was Elizabeth Marshall, and she had a catchphrase of sorts. They're all the same, they're all to blame. Well, tonight I'm joined by a guest who is not the same, and consequently not to blame. He's a member of Parliament for Carleton, Mississippi Mills. Member of Provincial Parliament. Formerly head of the Ontario Landowners Association. He holds a BSc in Civil Engineering from Queen's University. The Trillium Party's own Jack MacLaren. Jack, thank you for being part of Trillium Talk.
Well, Greg, it's great to be here.
Fantastic. Now, you caused a bit of a ruckus recently by being ejected from Queen's Park.
Well, Greg, it's just a misunderstanding. Some people didn't appreciate all the fine words we had to say. We were basically speaking on behalf of democracy and democratic rights of people. We were debating our bill called the Affordable Electricity Act, which is a private member's bill, on February 22nd. And during the course of that debate, we had criticized the members of provincial parliament for not doing a good enough job of holding the government to account and keeping the price of electricity to a reasonable level for the people of Ontario. And there was a good reason to say to the government, the government broke the law. Because they had, that was true. There was a law that said they had to do certain accountability procedures and steps, and the Auditor General said you didn't do it, you didn't follow your own law. So I said during my speech 2 times, the government broke the law. The second time I said the government broke the law, the Speaker said, withdraw. Usually the Speaker would say withdraw to an MPP when they say something on parliamentary, like criticizing the Premier for being dumb or
smelling bad or
something like that.
Okay.
So she said withdraw, and I said it's true. And she said withdraw in a stronger voice, and I said I cannot withdraw the truth. And she said you are named, which means you're ejected from the House at that point. So then I was escorted out of the House by the Sergeant-at-Arms, and that was the activity for the day. That was the end of my time in the House for the rest of that day. The penalty is mild. The next day I was back in the House doing my job as usual. But we took that little video clip of where I said I cannot withdraw the truth, and then was escorted out of the House for telling the truth, and played that on Facebook, and we got 550,000 views, Greg, which is just fantastic. Now, you might say, well, what's so great about, during a private member's bill, which are usually considered almost non-events because they're not a government bill, that it would get so many views? Well, the whole point is that a sitting MPP was sitting in the Ontario legislature, the largest province in the country of Canada, which is supposed to be a democracy, and is ejected from the House for telling the truth. And is the truth undemocratic? Is the truth not respected? Is the truth not accepted in the Legislative Assembly of Ontario? 550,000 people thought, yes, it is. And
well,
it should
it sounds like there's an appetite for the truth, and there was an appetite for that video clip.
No such plan had ever been approved in the previous 10 years as required by legislation. This legislature did nothing to stop the government from breaking the law. The MPP did not...
I'd ask you to withdraw.
It's true.
I would ask you to withdraw.
I can't withdraw the truth.
Name the member. I name the member from Carleton, Mississippi Mills.
I name the member from Carleton, Mississippi Mills.
Well, there we go. Now, you're free to do that in the Trillium Party, to have opposing views, but you've been kicked out of Queen's Park before as a member of the PC Party, is that right?
Well, I have been, but always I was trying to do what was right, Greg, as you mentioned a minute ago. I believe my job as an MPP is to represent the people in my riding, to represent my constituents. I think that's the job of every MPP. So I believe when people elect me or any other MPP, they expect me to be their voice at Queen's Park. They expect me to be their vote at Queen's Park. And they expect me to understand that I work for them, that I work for the constituents of my riding. I get that. I've always tried to do that. And from time to time, it has got me into hot water with the party I was with at the time, which was the PC party. If you don't blindly toe the line in the party and do what you're told and vote the way you're told and have absolute loyalty to the party without question, and if you ever question it or cause any trouble at all, that is just absolutely unaccepted, and life becomes difficult for an MPP.
I think you're going to have to explain that a little bit further. I think if you're outside of the legislature, you don't even know what a party whip is. So what's a party whip, and how was this used against you?
Well, each party has a whip whose job, amongst other things, is to call a whipped vote. A whipped vote means when the party in caucus says, well, this is the way we're going to vote on this particular bill or issue, and we will have a whipped vote. What they mean is we'll all vote the same, or we must all vote the same. And if you really feel you can't vote for that bill because you object to it, you're expected to not show up in the House for the vote. That's the strongest position you could take. Now, if a caucus member shows up and votes the other way, that's considered, you're not considered a good party soldier, you're not considered loyal, you're not considered trustworthy. And many times in caucus, their fingers were pointed at me and saying, you're not loyal, we can't trust you. And it took me a long time, Greg, to figure out what they meant by loyal and trustworthy, because I felt I always was loyal and trustworthy to the people that counted, and that's my constituents. And I always was. And I always will be. And with the Trillium Party, of course, now I have the freedom to speak on behalf of my constituents and vote on behalf of my constituents the way I feel my constituents would want me to, and that I know that I work for my constituents. My loyalty is to the constituents first, party second.
Well, you know what? That sounds like it resonates. We've got a comment from Guy and Abel. You can't withdraw the truth, but apparently you can vote for it. Vote Trillium. Bob, Jordan, get this guy signed up as a volunteer.
Well, I know Guy Annabelle. He's a great fellow. We're glad to have his support.
Oh, Guy Annabelle. Not Guy. Fair enough. Well, so what were some instances where you got in trouble with the party whip in your previous term as PC MPP?
Well, let me give you an example of one of the last caucus meetings I was in last spring in May. May 24th was the day that we made the decision to leave the PC party and join the Trillium party. So while I was still in caucus, one of the last bills we talked about was Bill 89. And what Bill 89 was going to do was say that if a little boy or a little girl was confused about their sexual orientation, so say a little boy thought he was a girl or a girl thought she was a boy, that can happen from time to time. That's not horribly unusual. Generally speaking, kids will outgrow that, and as they become teenagers and young adults, they realize that, well, Johnny really is a boy and Mary really is a girl. And then, of course, parents would, as parents, feel they have a responsibility to offer guidance to their children, as we all do as parents, and try to make good citizens out of them and give them some direction and coaching on what the right thing to do and what the world's all about and how they should perform, and basically how to become good people and good citizens in our country, in our province. So this bill was going to say that if a parent steps in and offers guidance to little Johnny and says, well, no, Johnny, you're really a boy. And if the Children's Aid Society feels that the father's guidance is too strong, it could be viewed as abuse because the father is interfering in the right of the child to choose his sexual orientation, and the Children's Aid Society would then have the right to take the child away from the family. That's a terrible law. That law passed, and it is law in Ontario right now. But 4 of us in caucus, and I want to tell you how caucus performed, because this will give you a little bit of an inside view on what's wrong with the party, where there's so much control and individual MPPs don't have the right to speak and vote freely on behalf of their constituents. So there was 2 social conservative people in caucus who said, well, I can't vote for that bill because that flies in the face of everything I stand for and everything my constituents stand for. I stood up and spoke in support of Rick Nichols, who is a social conservative, and I'm not in the true sense of the word. I'm probably 95% of the way there, and I have great appreciation and support of social conservative people as good people in our society, in our communities. I said, I support Rick to have the right to vote the way he wants. We should have a free vote, and that's what Rick wanted. And I said, I have social conservative people in my riding who are very upset about this bill, so really, I have to vote against this bill too, not just because I support Rick, but because my constituents want me to vote against it.
Well, you know what, Jack? I don't think you have to be a social conservative to be a little creeped out at the idea that Children's Aid Society can take away your kids for what sounds like a political reason.
Well, you're right, Greg. You don't have to be a social conservative. That's just plain wrong. That's just a bad law. And that's social engineering by government saying we know better than parents on how to raise their kids. So let me just finish the story.
Sorry about that.
So what happened was, so four of us, there was one other fellow, Michael Harris, who also spoke up and said, I also have social conservative people in my riding that I represented, so I have to vote against the bill too, because that's what they would like me to do. So four of us were saying we should have the right to vote the way we want, an open vote, and the rest said we want a whip vote. Even though we think it's a bad bill, we feel the party should have a whip vote to vote in support of the bill. Otherwise, somebody might think we don't like children or something of that nature. So we were voting out of fear as opposed to voting for the right thing. So we had quite a loggerheads, quite a confrontation, and there was considerable anger on that behalf of the caucus because four would dare not to toe the party line blindly, even though it flies in the face of everything you stand for. And then one caucus member said, well, why, if we can't have a whip vote supporting the bill, why don't we have a whip vote against the bill? And everybody said, oh, well, that would work, because then we have a whip vote. So now think about it, Greg. So now it doesn't matter whether you vote yes or whether you vote no, so long as it's a whip vote. So what do you stand for? Nothing.
As long as you don't get to choose which way you vote, the vote is completely legitimate.
Well, that's right. The whole point is to vote the same. So
well, that sounds fantastic. Oh, you know what? We're getting a question here. This is from Derek Paul Sharp. Jack, one question a lot of people have is, if the Trillium Party can't form government, what's the point of voting for them? What can be accomplished? So can you address this issue?
Absolutely. That's a great question. And thank you very much, Derek, for that. So, and I have another really good example of what one vote means. And I have voted alone many times, 7 times to be precise, since I've been a member of the Trillium Party, once or twice when I was with the PC Party, and I paid for that, of course, because that's not accepted. But certainly with the Trillium Party, it is accepted. So there was a bill where it was a social conservative bill. Oh, yes, it was the bubble bill about a 50-meter no-go zone around abortion clinics. Now, the issue isn't so much about abortions. It's the point I want to make on how important one vote is. So the bill, I voted against that bill. I was the only member in the legislature to vote against that bill. And it created a 50-meter no-go zone around the building, the abortion clinic, where people could not come and assemble or speak. Now, I spoke against that bill because that interferes with and removes people's constitutional right to freedom of public assembly and freedom of speech, because that 50-meter zone would take in the public street where people have a right to be as Canadians, and that right is enshrined in the Constitution, freedom of speech. So I voted against that bill, but I was only one. And so you would say, well, what difference does one make? Well, Bob Yashik, our leader, and myself were invited by the head of the Canadian Christian College, Charles McVitie, to come and meet with him a week or two after that vote. And he basically wanted to say, thank you for voting against that bill. And then he says, people ask what difference one vote makes. And he said, I'm going to tell you what difference one vote makes. When you voted for that bill, you voted for freedom of speech, and the one vote didn't change the bill. It's still law, but it gave us hope. He said if there had been nobody, if it was 0 votes for the bill, against the bill, then we would have had 0 hope. There'd be no daylight at the end of the tunnel. But this way, there was 1. And maybe the next time there'll be 2 or 10 or 50. And it gives us hope that someday we will change, we will get what we want, that democracy will work, and that right will be done.
Well, that depends on which way they whip. If they whip in favor of it, then
Well,
a whole lot more than 10.
well, we at the Trillium Party, we don't worry about whipping because we don't do that.
Okay.
We're what you call democratic, Greg. It's a novel idea.
Your constituents must love you.
Well, actually, I do have some friends for sure.
Fantastic.
And actually,
fantastic.
not just in my constituency, across Ontario. When we got those 550,000 views on Facebook, 40% of them were from outside of Ontario.
Really?
So democracy is something that's respected by people everywhere, even beyond this province, and I'd say beyond this country.
Well, that's just fantastic to hear about. Well, I guess you've sort of gotten into this, but what aspects of the Trillium Party, aside from the no whip, do you find most appealing? Like, why should people support it?
Well, actually, the main benefit, the main principle that should appeal to everybody is the fact that at the Trillium Party, individual MPPs will have that freedom to speak and vote on behalf of their constituents, will be expected to understand we work for our constituents, and I'm kind of repeating what I said a few minutes ago, but that's very, very important because none of the other parties take that point of view. They take the point of view that you're loyal to the party, we'll tell you what to do, we'll tell you how to vote, etc., etc., and so you don't have that freedom, and you don't have that respect for constituents, and you don't have that respect for the institution of democracy, which is the respect for the people of Ontario. So for the people of Ontario to look at Trillium, you should understand that we work for you. You should understand that we respect you. You should understand that my voice will be your voice, and that my vote will be your vote. And absolutely, and my voice and my vote will not be controlled by the Trillium Party. It will be controlled by the people of Ontario, and actually it'll be controlled for me by the people in my riding. That is democracy, and I will never change. Greg, I have never had a day since I left the PC Party of Ontario that I regretted that decision. Every day since that point has been a better day than the days before.
To be fair, Patrick Brown was leader at the time.
Who?
Patrick Brown. We haven't all forgotten who it was. We've got another question. This one's from Nelson Reeslate. How are we going to fight back against Bill 139 with conservation? And how are you planning to keep conservation off of private properties?
Well,
you know what? Just for those uninitiated, we should first explain what Bill 139 is.
Absolutely. So I'll touch on that. So Bill 139 passed in December of last year. I voted against it. And again, I was the only one in the whole legislature to vote against it, which is absolutely appalling. So what Bill 139 did, it did two things. So it was an omnibus bill, as you said to me a little bit earlier this afternoon, Greg. Two things, both bad. It got rid of the Ontario Municipal Board, which is an impartial appeal board for land use planning issues, which I think is very necessary. It's not perfect, but it was good. So we've lost a good and worthy institution, and we've lost a true sense of appeal on land use issues in Ontario. It's a sad day. The same bill had a second issue in it, which Nelson's talking about, which is the conservation authorities. It gives more power and authority to the conservation authorities in the province of Ontario to warrantless entry onto private property to enforce the rules and regulations and legislations that they're charged with enforcing. That's terrible. There should be no right of warrantless entry onto private property by any government agency of any kind, by any level of government in Canada, let alone the province of Ontario, let alone by the conservation authorities of Ontario. So I would say to Nelson, I voted against that bill. I've always had a problem with the conservation authorities. They're never welcome on private property, and we should tell them that. Stand true, stand tall, put up your sign saying, stop, back off, government, this is my land, and tell them not welcome and they can't come on your property. When you stand tall and brave like that, you'd be amazed how many people will back off and go back to their offices where they should be and will stay off your property. So now you can count on me in the future always to be a voice against the conservation authorities. I believe in the province of Ontario that we do not need conservation authorities. I believe in the province of Ontario that private property owners deserve to have the right and the freedom to do what they want on their own property, and accept that with the freedom of private property ownership and use and enjoyment comes the responsibility to be a good citizen to their neighbors and to their environment. You must be a responsible citizen. But that's the price of freedom, and a price that we would gladly all pay.
But by building a hunting shed or illegal archery range, they could be seriously damaging the environment, no?
No, they're not. I would say property owners, what better steward of the land is there than the private property owner? As Canadians, we take great pride in private property ownership. It's my farm, it's my bush, it's my home, it's my backyard. It's not yours. Greg, the only rights you have to come on my property are the rights that I extend to you. If I choose to invite you over for a barbecue in my backyard, then you have the right to be there because I've invited you and given you permission to be there and enjoy a barbecue or whatever we're going to do. If you want to come to my bush or my farm and hunt or play or work or just do recreation, you have that right if I give it to you. And that right could be given to government in exactly the same way. It's my right that I will give to whoever I want and take away from whoever I want as well. That's private property.
Do you get a sense of what are the conservation authorities hoping to accomplish?
Well, what they're trying to accomplish sure is not in the best interest of private landowners. They continually put more and more layers of land use restrictions on private property, such as wetlands, natural heritage designations. The municipality of Mississippi Mills, which is in my riding, Greg, is right now putting on a huge battle, and they're a very well organized bunch of people, very bright people, fighting against their municipality adopting the natural heritage designation coming down from the province of Ontario, which would then be enforced by local conservation authorities, of course. So, and my hat's off to these people because they've had about 4 or 5 meetings with about 400 or 500 people at every meeting, and people are saying, it's my property, government should back off, and they're right. And good for them. They're doing a great job. More people in Ontario need to stand up and fight for their property rights. One man said, a bad law is no law at all, and Bill 139 is a bad law.
Well, just explain what exactly happened in Mississippi Mills. So it's been designated a heritage site?
Well, there's a land use designation in Ontario called the Natural Heritage Designation, which means almost anything natural. If they put that designation on property, just about everything there is natural. The trees, the water, the soil, the rocks. And you really can't do very much to it. You can't go in and dig holes or build houses or do anything you want. It's basically the land is frozen and sterilized from any kind of economic development, whether it's farming, hunting, fishing, harvesting trees, for instance.
Well, and the person who owns this land, let's say hypothetically it was a farm in the first place, or a farm with some nature on the property somewhere.
Sure.
If this designation is put in place and they can't make any adjustments to their property, that must hurt the resale value.
Well, absolutely.
Are they compensated once this goes into
No. When there is no compensation for any of these land use designations placed on private property that restrict the use and enjoyment and value of the property. For instance, we have a land use appraisal consultant in my community who has told us at meetings that if you get a wetlands designation placed on your property, the market value can go down by as much as 85%, but you get no compensation. So what we say is, if it's in the public interest to save the wetland, then the public can pay.
Well, yeah, I mean these people who are having this value destroyed from their real estate holdings, they might not be real secure in their retirement without them.
Well, that's right. Can you imagine if the government, Greg, decided that, say you had $100,000 in the bank and that was your savings after you've worked hard for many years and you've saved that and that's part of your retirement plan, and they come along and say, well, Greg, we're going to put a designation on that bank account and use 85% of that money to buy a wetland for the public. Well, clearly you would not be happy about that.
Don't get through to any ideas.
So clearly everybody would say, well, that's wrong because they're stealing your money. They're stealing the money out of your cash out of your bank account. Obviously, that's wrong. The government is a thief. But if they put a wetlands designation on your property and you lose 85% of the market value, it's exactly the same thing. You have only 15% of the value of your property left. Somebody stole that value, and that somebody was the government, and that's wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, we've got another comment in. This one is from... Oh, this is a response comment from Nelson. Thank you for voting against it.
Well, Nelson, I was happy to vote against that. And those votes for me, Nelson, are easy. I don't have to spend a long time thinking about the right thing to do. That just jumps off the paper at me. And that's basically what I stand for is freedom, property rights. Property rights is one of the basic tenets of wealth in this country. When the settlers of Canada came here, the first thing that everybody wants is to own property. We all want to own our own home, and we're so proud of ownership. So you buy a lot with a house on it in the city, that's your home, nobody else's. You work hard, you pay all that money to own a home, and the only one that has any rights to it is you. That's the way it's supposed to work. So the only way I can go into your living room or your backyard, Greg, is if you invite me there, because it's your private property. You control that. You own it. You make the rules. That's the way it works with private property. So, and of course, the wealth of the nation was built on private property. If we took away private property ownership and said you don't have the right to own private property, you only have the right to be a tenant on your property. And there are people that think that way. That's communist thinking. The United Nations thinks that way. In the Agenda 2021 documents, they think that way. They say things like the unearned wealth from capital gain of private property would do far more good if it was equally distributed amongst the masses as opposed to being left in your pocket, Greg. So when you sell your home for more than you paid for it, that's capital gain. And you didn't earn that. So that wealth would do far better, more good if it was distributed amongst the other people that don't own your house. And all property like that, all private property. That's a terrible thing, So you would destroy the wealth of a nation with a snap of your fingers, The wealth of this nation and every Western democracy is built on the foundation of private property ownership.
You thought your generation defeated the Soviets back in '88, but they were just sleeping. They're coming back.
Well, they're alive at Wild Queen's Park.
Fantastic stuff. Well, there are some other. There was a private members bill that you were involved with recently, or was it a private members motion? Did you want to speak to that?
Yes, there was a private members bill that I thought was very interesting. I meet some very good people, Greg. I have an interesting job. People come in and say, look, and I have a good idea that would do Canadians a lot of good. And one of these fellows was a man named David Kahan from Toronto. He's an actuary. And he came up with this idea that with respect to a life insurance policy. So for a person who would own a life insurance policy, this bill would allow them to use that as collateral to get a loan. So take out a loan of cash. So let's say you had a $100,000 life insurance policy. This bill would allow you to take out a loan of, shall we say, $60,000. So some third person would come along and loan you the $60,000 cash. You'd pay interest on the loan, like any loan. When you die or I die, then the loan would be paid off from the life insurance policy. Now, the life insurance policy would remain owned by the man or the family, or by the man or woman, and the beneficiaries would be the same. Say it was the children, but instead of getting the full benefit, they'd get what's left after the loan was paid off. Now, life insurance policies, most of us think when we're younger, such as a young man like yourself, Greg, you might have a wife and kids, so you want to protect your family in case an accident happens to you and you get killed in a car crash or something, so you'd have life insurance, so your wife could raise the family. That's responsible. But then once the children grow up and you get old and gray-haired like me, and my kids are off buying their own life insurance policies, my wife and I still have our life insurance policy, but we don't need to protect the kids anymore because we've gone through that stage in life. But maybe a doctor might say to me, you've got cancer, you got 2 years to live. And maybe I'd like to have a little bit more money so I could live better. If I could take out a loan against my life insurance policy, that would give me the cash to enjoy those last couple of years a little better. And that'd be a wonderful thing. Right now, you legally cannot do that in Ontario, and this would allow a person to do that. I would see this as being a really good benefit to senior citizens in Ontario. And I thought, what a great idea. Now, it's a private member's bill. It didn't get debated because we'd already used my one bill a year in February. But I mean, we tabled it. We did a question period. We did a statement. We had a media studio event at Queen's Park, and we made as much media out of it as we could because I think that's a super idea. That's the kind of thing government should do. That would help senior citizens without the need for any taxpayers' dollars, so no government.
Well, then they're not going to want to do it.
Well, the Kathleen Wynne government would want to do it for sure. You're right there, Greg. And maybe that's why they haven't. But it would be good because, the individual person could use their own asset, their own property, because their life insurance is their property, to be able to borrow against and create the wealth they need to live a little better, in this case, in the last years of their life. And also, otherwise, like say a person didn't have a life insurance policy or couldn't take out the loan, and they didn't have enough money, they might have to rely on their children to help pay the last few years of their life, So that becomes an imposition on a younger family.
Are there any other provinces where this is legal?
I'm not so much sure about other provinces. Certainly in the United States it's legal, and it's practiced in a number of different countries. So, if Trillium, well, not if, when Trillium becomes government, that would be one of the things that we would do. And that'd be a great boon for senior citizens. And that's, as a caring society, Greg, we have a moral obligation to help those who cannot help themselves. And I say there's three main groups that fall into that category. Autistic people, or I say autistic families. That's a huge cost and burden on families. And as a society, we should help them. Mental health doesn't get anywhere near enough help, and they need a lot of help. And struggling seniors. Some seniors are doing well, but some are not. And I was I talked about this private members bill would help those people. And this would be a great thing. And without having to raise taxes and take more money out from the government to help people who are in need and need some help.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, you were also involved with a bill surrounding Agricor. Did you want to talk about that as well?
Yes. So Agricor is an agency or a division of the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Food that is charged with managing grant programs and subsidy programs for farmers. The Auditor General did a report a couple of years ago. The Auditor General does a report analyzing all the various ministries from time to time to make sure they're doing a good job. And he was very critical of Agricor from the Ministry of Agriculture and Food for bad management of their programs. And this is one particular program. So about 3 years ago, Agricor, the government has been in big debt and been running out of money for a long time. So this was the behavior of a broke government. They were looking for more money anywhere they could get it. So the government had loaned money to farmers about 9 years ago. This was in 2003 when mad cow disease happened. Beef farmers had a terrible time, and the government stepped in to help out because...
And they loaned them money?
Well, they gave it, they loaned it, they gifted it. It was all very...
It was a grant, right?
A grant or gift, and for different farmers, different terminology was used. So, and this was where part of the problem was. It wasn't a nice crystal clear black and white gift, grant, loan, or anything. Different farmers got different letters with different terms. So the money was given to farmers 10 years ago. And 10 years later, they sent a letter to these farmers to say, oh, now we want the money back. 10 years later, Greg. For normal private citizens, if you and I were doing business with each other, there's a law called the statute of limitations, which is 2 years. After 2 years, I can't send you any more bills because 2 years is time's up and that's over. But the government's exempt from the law. So here's another example of government, bad law and bad government. So government, there's no limitation on how far back the government can go to collect money from private citizens. They can go back forever, theoretically.
And they're
that's legal.
They're collecting money that was once a grant?
Yes.
That sounds extra illegal.
Oh, well, it's terrible. I know fellas that would, if they pay it, and I tell them, don't pay it. I say, if they did, they would lose their farm. So I say...
So this is a significant amount of money.
For some people. I was one of those people. For me, it was a couple of $1,000s. It was a smaller number, but I know many people, it was $20,000. One fellow was much more. Basically, he would lose his farm. And the poor fellow is very stressed out. It's a terrible thing to happen to people.
Did they have any
And
recourse?
the Auditor General, excuse me, Greg, the Auditor General wrote a very scathing report about terrible mismanagement of Agricor, of the whole business of keeping records of how much money they loaned out, or was it a loan, was it a gift, was it a grant, what was it? and their computer system was a mess. They put in a new computer system. Their records were inaccurate, missing, only half there. And the Auditor General says, your records are such a mess, and your management is so bad, I'd recommend you forget about trying to collect that money because you have no idea how much money people owe you, or if they owe you. And in fact, you're asking money to pay you back money that in fact don't owe you money. And I know a person, an individual used to work at Agricor who has information on people that did not owe the money, and he told his superiors, and they went ahead and collected the money anyway. This is a big problem. This is scandalous. This is wrong. And we're pursuing the issue, but the Liberals have no interest in pursuing it, and the PC party didn't either. I was the only one at Queen's Park that stood up and would fight for farmers. So I sent a letter, told my caucus members, the PCs represent all of rural Ontario pretty well. I said, if you have farmers who want to fight back against this, because I termed it 9 years is too long. The government has no right to collect this money. That's my point of view. And I told that to farmers. So I said, if you want to fight back, we'll hire a lawyer. Send me your names, your information, and how much money that the government thinks you owe and wants you to pay. And if each of you will send, we thought we'll hire a lawyer, give us $500 each, and we'll hire a lawyer and go to court and fight Agricor. We did that. Unfortunately, we didn't win, but we tried. And we're not done yet, so stay tuned. There's going to be more news, and it's going to be in the papers, and we're going to continue to try to make right this problem.
Now, you yourself are a farmer.
I am.
Is that correct?
I am.
Okay, so with all this Agricor in mind, is the odor of BS more pungent during planting season or when Parliament is in session at Queen's Park?
The Queen's Park is a very fertile place, Greg.
This is just unbelievable. Taking grant money back from people who were given it, poor record keeping, going after. Now,
and we know for a fact there's a few people that didn't owe it and paid it.
And what you have to ask yourself is how much money was this going to raise the government?
Well,
in the grand scheme of
actually,
things, how big was the program?
Well, I think it was 4,500 farmers. I think it was something in the order of $50 million from farmers across Ontario, and the majority did pay because farmers are honest people and good people, and they feel, well, if government tells me I owe money, I guess I have to pay, and they did.
Yeah, $50 million.
Well, I mean, so I'm an honest person too, but I'd say I wouldn't pay because 9 years is too long. You don't go back to somebody after an unreasonable length of time and say, oh, by the way, send me that $50,000 that I gave you 10 years ago. Like, that hurts people, and that's wrong. And that's...
how many people keep records of letters they got 9 years ago?
Well, most don't. Yeah, we always thought with 7 years is enough. I think Canada Revenue Agency wants 7 years, so... Yeah. You eventually go into your office once in a while and just throw old stuff out. So yeah, you'd have no records. So when government says you did something 10 years ago, how do you know?
You don't know.
Anyways, wrong. That's more bad government.
Absolutely. We've got another question from Facebook. This one's from Amit Pitamber. Jack, could you talk about Trillium's plan to better track healthcare expenditures?
Yes, and this is from Amit, and that's a good question, Amit. So we do have the essence of a healthcare policy, and I want to start off, Greg, by saying this idea came from another really bright man who walked into my office about 6 years ago when I first got elected in Ottawa. He was a former director of Public Works Canada with the federal government, so that would be management of one of the biggest organizations in Canada. That's a huge, huge organization. This is a very capable man. He's part of a club called Peace, Order, and Good Government, which is retired seniors that had very high-level positions. And they think and try to come up with ideas on how could we make Canada a better place, it's a wonderful group of people. So these retired people that have great experience, great education, and have ideas on how things should be better because they've seen some problems in their working life. So he came up with this idea for improving healthcare in Ontario. His name is Phil Donnelly, a great man. I hope he's listening to us tonight because there's a lot of great Canadians out there, and Phil's one of them. And he came up with this beautiful, simple idea. It was 4 pages, and it's about money management in the province of Ontario in healthcare to try to make better use of our dollars. And he came up and he copied this idea from Taiwan. So it's done in Taiwan. It works in Taiwan, which is a very progressive society, not unlike Canada. There are 23 million people. We're 30 or 35. highly educated, very progressive, very much like Canada. And so this is a health card that would be almost like a credit card. Now, government still pays all the health bills. We're not still universal health care. But let's say every time you go to the hospital, say with a broken leg, so you would go and say, my name's Greg, here's my health card, I have a broken leg, I'm at the Toronto General Hospital, and you go in and it's Dr. John Smith or whoever it is, and they fix your broken leg, and a big part of this would be putting a price on it, and it costs $2,000 to fix my broken leg. So Phil said the system would be, you'd have this credit card type system, and so everybody would, you'd get a monthly statement, just like your credit card, like your Visa card, and it would show all the items, but it'd be healthcare. So if you went in 2 or 3 times for health problems, these 2 or 3 items would show up with your name, the name of the doctor, what hospital, and what the procedure was and what the cost was. And part of it, Phil said, is you need to have a price list. So broken legs are $1,000, heart attacks are $10,000, cancer is $20,000, et cetera, et cetera. Long-term care, put a price on that too. Everything would have a price. And so then we would have a tracking system, which would be this monthly credit card type statement. And so you as the patient would get it. That information would be available to managers in healthcare or the public. And we could see what it cost, how many broken legs were in Ontario, how much money we spent on broken legs in Ontario, and why did it cost more in Toronto than Ottawa, say, for broken legs? Maybe Toronto needs to do a better job or whatever, And a beautifully simple system of just putting dollar figures on everything, and it'd be patient-centered care. So instead of giving a lump sum of money to a hospital of, say, $100 million or $500 million or whatever they need for the year, and saying, there you go, hopefully that's enough to get you through the year, and sometimes it isn't, and then they have to lay off nurses or close a few beds. So this way, there'd be enough money, it'd be paid for procedure per patient, so it'd be patient-centered healthcare. So there would always be the money to take care of the patient and the problem they had.
So do we not currently have this information? We don't know how many.
Well, we have it.
How much money was spent on?
We have
broken
it
legs,
partially right now. Where's my paper here? We have it partially right now in that, especially doctors like surgeons, etc., get a fixed fee for whatever surgery they do. So that's putting a price tag on it. For drugs like pharmacy products, there's a price on the pills that you get. But for all the other things like running the hospital, hospitals just get a big lump sum given once a year. Long-term care is the same kind of thing, the way the LHINs operate. So we need to just expand it to everything else. 60% of the money we spent is it's not patient-centered. It's not following the patient. So this would be a big improvement. It'd be just money management, effective money management, and we'd do a better job of healthcare.
Absolutely.
Now we have some other ideas from other good people that have come into us to talk about what do we need to do to provide more effective healthcare, which basically is realizing that the baby boomers are getting older. Guys like me and Bob, well, me anyways, Bob's younger than I am. But so we need to, as the baby boomers get older, and you tend to get older and sicker with age, and you need more health care and more cost. So we need to say, well, how can we better provide health care for our aging baby boomers? And most of that means at home, in our communities, in long-term, but not long-term care facilities, but anywhere but in hospitals unless you absolutely have to. So right now we have lineups in hospitals. We have in some beds, hospitals in the corridors because there aren't enough rooms. And hospitals are just bursting at the seams. So we need to get people out of the hospitals that don't need to be there and into appropriate facilities like long-term care, recuperation hospitals, or better yet, even at home, because everybody's happier at home, and that's the best health care you can get.
Absolutely, yeah. Now, an issue that's been affecting Carleton, Mississippi Mills, your local riding, has been the opiate crisis. So specifically with respect to fentanyl, a new opiate that is supposedly and looks to be more addictive but also more lethal than anything that's been seen in the past.
Well, that's right, and it affects more than just my riding, but certainly in Kanata it's a big problem, and it's really flared up in the last 2 or 3 years. We have an organization in my riding called We the Parents, which is parents of kids that have got onto these fentanyl drugs. They're very addictive. They tell me that one use and the kids can be addicted, and they're lethal. They can kill the kids, and a few kids have died. So it's a scary, scary business, and they're very young. So I've gotten to know Sean O'Leary from Canada, who is the founder of this group called We the Parents, and he's done a great job of organizing parents to try to get help for their kids. And Sean was telling me how desperate it is for the need of help and how little help there is. So right now, if a person who's addicted to drugs or alcohol wants help to go to a treatment center to withdraw, if you're 17 and older, there are facilities that will offer treatment. But if a kid is 16 and younger, there is no facilities. There are 0 beds in Ottawa or anywhere in Ontario for kids between the age of 16 and younger. And most of these kids are very young, in that 14 to 15-year-old age, that are getting hooked up with these fentanyl drugs. And they got nowhere to go. Sean took his child to a hospital, and they said, well, we can't keep your child. You'll just have to take him or her home and do the best you can.
So there are just no services for under 16s?
That's right. There's nothing for treatment to withdraw. So even if the kid says, geez, Dad, I want help, take me somewhere where I can get treatment so that I can get off these drugs. And there's nothing. I couldn't believe that when Sean told me that. So we have a long way to go. These people need help desperately because their kids are literally dying, and we need to do better.
Just crazy. Well, what do you propose to do?
Well, we're raising the public knowledge about this as much as we possibly can. We're putting pressure on the government to try to come up with money, much as we don't want to see government increasing their spending. This is an area we have to spend some money because these kids need help. It comes right back to that, what I said a bit earlier, Greg. As a caring society, we have moral obligation to help those who can't help themselves. Addicts can't help themselves. They're addicted. They need help. And we as a society need to step forward and help these folks because parents aren't equipped to deal with that. It's a serious situation and we need to do better. And at the Trillium Party, we know that. If you look in our literature, we talk about those 3 groups of people that need help. The developmentally disabled, because I've had meeting with agencies. There's a sad story too. I'd like to say a few words on that. But developmentally disabled people, mental health and addictions, the 2 tend to go together, and struggling seniors. They all need help. It's going to take a lot of money, and we have to come up with that money. So the way to do that, the job of government is to help these people, is we have to make sure that business is doing well. At the Trillium Party of Ontario, we say we support small business because we know that small business is the backbone of the economy of this province, of this country, and I'd say the Western world. So we need to do whatever we can. Well, they create 75 to 80% of the jobs in the private sector. We need to do whatever we can to help small business thrive. We need to create a business environment where small business people want to invest, take the risks to grow little businesses. And we want them to be more profitable so they have healthier businesses. Maybe they could hire more people. And when all those things happen, they'll be able to pay more taxes because they're making more money, and there's more people with jobs who, again, will pay a little bit of tax. We're not going to raise anybody's tax rates. We just need everybody to have a healthier economy, taking home more money. And in that way, government will have the money they need to do the job they have to do, which is helping people who cannot help themselves.
Okay, so what would you do to make Ontario a more attractive place for businesses, large and small?
Well, there's a few obvious things. One of them is we're vastly over-regulated in the province of Ontario. We have 360,000 regulations in the province of Ontario, which is just mind-boggling. And if you talk to small business people, you will hear them talk about how the red tape is choking them. They need forms for this, permits for that, fees for more and more activities. And it's just choking small business. I heard a case, there was a law that was going to pass recently with regard to elevator repairmen. There's a number of small companies that will do maintenance on elevators. This is the elevators in high-rise buildings. And they were going to create a new legislation that was going to create vast new regulations and restrictions and fines if they didn't fix. Well, they were going to have to fix the elevator, in 3 days or 7 days. And if they didn't do that, they would get a fine. Imagine being a repairman gets a fine because the job doesn't go well through no fault of your own. So the little companies are saying, That's enough for me. I want to sell my little business to the big companies. So that's a job killer for the small businessmen in Ontario. So we need we say at Trillium we'll reduce the number of regulations by we need to reduce the number of regulations by 30%. And then we need to get the price of hydro down. And then we need to listen to small business people and ask them, what do we need to do to help you? Tell us what we need to do. We need to listen to people.
Fantastic. Oh, we've got another comment. This one's again from Emmett Pitamber. Hi, Jack. Please talk more about our Electricity Act. Thanks.
Well, electricity, we have the most expensive electricity in North America. And there's no reason for that. Ontario used to, 20 years ago, we had one of the lowest rates for electricity in Ontario. We had a plentiful supplies based on hydro, then nuclear. We have some natural gas, but right now we're about 60% nuclear, 35% water powered, a little bit of gas. We've made terrible mistakes, the Liberal government, with the Green Energy Act of going into solar and wind power, which in itself isn't a bad idea.
So if hydro and nuclear aren't green, what color are they?
Well, you're right. They are green. Water. What could be more greener and more natural than water power? The rivers flow and
it literally falls from the sky.
That's right. And of course, nuclear produces no carbon dioxide whatsoever. So what could be better? And the fuel is cheap. Plants are expensive to build, but once you got one built, boy, you have cheap power for a long, long time. And we have uranium in Canada, so the fuel's here, and the water's here. So we're a wealthy nation. If we just smarten up and make use of the resources that we have, our natural resources, we'll have no problem. We shouldn't be facing hydro bills like this. We can't afford the big subsidies we pay for wind and solar. Often these big installations are offshore companies, so the Ontario dollars are leaving the country and going to other nations, which is so wrong and so bad. We actually have a surplus of electricity, and we're selling it to the United States for about 2 cents a kilowatt hour. We also give $300 to $400 million. We have $300 to $400 million that we pay for conservation, which is like light bulbs that use less electricity. And at a time when we have a surplus, we shouldn't be spending $300 to $400 million to save electricity when we have too much already, and then we sell it to the Americans cheap. That's like exporting jobs. That's what we do there.
You know what, though? We've been locked into these wind and solar contracts, and the government signed on the dotted line. We're basically locked in for a long period of time, right? Mm-hmm. We can't get out of them, and there was no point within the last bunch of years where we could have avoided the predicament we're in now.
Right. There's another. Can I switch the subject, Greg, if I may?
I suppose you can, but weren't we able to get out of the Samsung contracts?
Oh, sorry, Samsung Yes.
Wind, solar, Samsung?
We did have the option of getting out of those at the end of December this year.
December?
December of 2017. And the government, for some reason, decided to renew. And they had the option of getting out.
And the other parties in Parliament?
Well, the PCs, I wasn't part of the PC party. I don't have that problem anymore. They didn't do anything about it either, so I don't know what the heck they were thinking about. But we had the opportunity to solve the problem, and we didn't do it. So, and I wish I had a good answer for you, and why not? That just makes no sense whatsoever.
Okay, fair enough. I wanted to get that in there.
Yes.
But yes, now on to...
Well, there was another little thing we did last fall. It seemed like a little thing at the time, but we've gotten a lot of very positive response. And it's Bill 100 called an act respecting identification of veterans. This would be military veterans. So what it does, just one little thing, it would put the word veteran on a driver's license and highlight it in bright yellow. And what that would do, it would let the general public know when they see somebody's driver's license that this man is a military veteran. And we would like Canadians, I think most Canadians would like to know when they're speaking to a veteran. I think they should know that. And the reason we would want to know that is to be able to say to that veteran, thank you. Thank you for what you do. You fight for our freedom. And we have a wonderful country here in Canada because we have freedom. We don't have wars in our soil. We have a constitution that defines our rights. We are a land where we live by the rule of law. and that gives us the freedom to live and play and work with our families in our communities the way we want. It's the best country in the world because we have freedom. But freedom wasn't free. It never has been. It was hard fought for in battlefields over centuries, heated debates in parliaments over centuries, and that's part of our British Christian cultural heritage that dates right back to the Magna Carta of 1215. And soldiers over all those years and currently in Canada are still fighting for our freedom in far-off lands like Afghanistan and Bosnia. And some of them come back broken, whether it's with physical injuries from stepping on landmines or bullets and bombs, or PTSD because they've been right in the front lines facing terrible situations that most of us could never imagine and would certainly not want to be exposed to. But they have, and they have fought our freedom and paid the price. And we need to say to these people, thank you very much for what you do. We benefit because of what you did. I had the privilege of standing with veterans on Parliament Hill about 6 weeks ago. Basically, they were protesting against the federal government for not giving them enough help for the injured veterans, whether it's physical injuries or PTSD, which is a huge problem for them. So that was a privilege to do that, to have this. This was a private member's bill of mine, and I was surprised at how much veterans would come to me and say, thanks for doing that. We appreciate that.
Did the bill pass?
It did.
Okay.
Private members' bills, unfortunately, will pass second reading, rarely ever get to third reading because the government usually doesn't call them up for third reading. That'd be a shortcoming of our Liberal friends. They should have done that. Would have been the right thing to do.
Well, it looks like we're out of time for this week, but Jack, thank you very much for being on the program.
Well, thank you for having me here,
and
Greg.
I hope you can come on again before the election.
I do too, and we'd love to.
All right, fantastic. Well, that's been Trillium Talk TV. He's Jack MacLaren. I'm Greg LaRue. Thanks, Ontario. Good night.
Good night, everybody.